Hi. So, my show has so far been recordings of interviews of women who have gone through some amazing transformations. Some of them have had loss or trauma and have been able to overcome it, while others have learned important lessons about themselves, their bodies, their business. And as I'm looking at my list of potential interviews and knowing that it's the holiday season and getting all the scheduling done, I thought, I'm one of those women that have gone through some things and have come out better. And so today I wanted to share a story that I had published in an anthology called The Boatman. The story is The Boatman. The anthology is Speaking Your Truth. And I'll put a link to that book in the show notes. But this was one of my first published works of short story or memoir. So I had previously published some fiction short stories and poems, but this was the first time that I really felt like what got picked up was very personal. And the anthology is a collection of stories from a lot of different women, and it really goes in line with what this show is all about. So today I want to share with you the story of the Boatman. When I was in college, I went to school in Minnesota. I'm originally from Colorado. And when I went to Minnesota, I was at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. While I was there, I decided not to have a car because it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. I lived on campus and everything was in walking distance, or I could take the bus. And in some cases, when I went in the city, I would go with friends, but I really didn't leave the campus area very often. At this time in my life, I was really trying to discover my identity and create some autonomy. And I had grown up in a 12-step program. I was attending Al Anon, and at one point in my high school years, I was drinking really heavily and I was blackout drinking. And part of the reason why I was doing that is because when I was 16, I was date raped. And I didn't really want to deal with that. I didn't want to call it rape. I didn't want to be a victim. But my behavior, this blackout drinking, was really to silence that inner knowing that I didn't want to face. Because of that, I started going to AA, and because I wanted to overcome this problem drinking. One um, one day I had gone to an AA meeting. I had taken the bus there, and it was at a clubhouse. And what an AA clubhouse is basically a meeting space with multiple meetings going on at any given time of day. So instead of it just being like a single location, like a lot of meetings are, this one had multiples for different reasons, and they do go on for an extended period of time. Not the meetings themselves, but meetings throughout the day. So I'd gone to a meeting, and there was a particular gentleman in the meeting who I didn't really notice, but I was outside and it had started to rain, and I was standing on the porch and having a cigarette, waiting for the bus to come to take me back to my dorm. Well, while I was out on the porch, this man from the meeting had come out and saw me and struck up some conversation with me and asked me if I would like a ride home since it was raining and I would have had to take a bus. Since he was in the meeting, I trusted him and I accepted the ride. And I told him what college I was at because there were quite a few colleges in the area. I got into his truck and he told me a little bit about himself, that he was an artist. And I don't remember all the details of that night because it's been so long now, but I took a ride home and he brought me to my dorm. And he was very chatty the whole way. I didn't really get many words in, but I didn't care because I had a ride. As we pulled up to the dorm, I was waiting for him to finish his thought, his sentence, what he was about to say. And I had my hand on the door to get out of the car as we were right in front of my dorm. And as I went to open the door and thank him, he drove off with me still in the car. He took off. He said, I want to show you my boat. Well, at this time, I started to panic because here I was right next to my dorm and we were driving away from it. I didn't know the area well because, like I said, I didn't drive. So I really knew the campus and the bus route, and that was about it. As we approached the stop sign to leave the campus, I considered jumping out, but I was afraid. I was afraid that he would think that I was crazy or that I was overreacting. And more, I felt like I was overreacting or I was being ridiculous. I didn't trust my instincts. At every stop sign that we came to, I felt like jumping out, but I didn't know where I was, and nothing bad had happened, and so I was questioning myself. As we continued to drive, I started watching the street signs so that I could remember where we were, and he just kept talking. There wasn't a whole lot that he was asking me or wanting my words at all. He just kept talking consistently. He noticed that I was watching the street signs and I was trying to make up a song in my head so that I could remember them, hoping that I could figure out a way to get back. He took a pause in his monologue and, noticing that I was watching the street signs, made some weird random turns. And the reason why I know is because there were streets that seemed to reappear, or that we would make like a double left and then a right, things that just didn't make sense. And I realized that he was intentionally trying to get me lost, which wouldn't have really taken much because once we turned off the main street from the bus route, I had no idea where we were. We started driving through an industrial area and I realized that we were very much alone. It was nighttime and it was drizzling and I had no clue where we were. Even though we were in an industrial area, Minnesota has a lot of water. And he parked on a dirt like parking area and then told me to get out of the car. I told him that I was too cold and that my roommate would be worried about me because she was expecting me home and that I just wanted to get back home. He told me that his whole purpose was to take me out there to see his boat and he wanted me to see it. He said we would be quick. So to be friendly, I got out of the car and walked over to what I expected to see was like a small dinghy or yacht. I wasn't, a small boat. And instead it was a canoe. And he said, get in the canoe. And I said, I don't want to get in the canoe. I'm scared of canoes. I'm scared of water. I'm scared of boating. I was saying a lot of things to let him know that I was afraid and that I wanted to go back home. I was willing to say any kind of lie just to get back home because I knew my roommate wasn't home. I knew she wasn't expecting me home. I knew she wouldn't have even given a second thought to it. But I thought if he knew that I had someone waiting for me, that he would get me back. He told me to get on the boat or on the canoe, and he was very persistent. And so, despite being terrified, I got onto the canoe, which he rowed the canoe to the dock where his boat was. And actually, I don't even remember a dock. We rowed the canoe to the boat. And I said, oh, great, that's a nice boat. Thank you. Can I get back home now? And he says, no, I want to show you inside. And I, again, made up some stories about how I'm scared of boats and water and how I don't want to get on the boat. And he told me very forcefully to get on the boat. So I did. And I was trembling at this time, partly from the cold and partly out of my fear. I got onto the boat and he opened the door and the cabin was very dark and he told me to step inside and then he turned on the light. It was just a small little houseboat. He had, a little fireplace, a mattress, a little kitchenette, and it looked like he probably lived there. Um, I wasn't, I've never really had been on a boat before, so I wasn't sure what to expect, but I said, "Oh, very nice." And he said, "Sit down and have a cup of coffee or tea." And I told him that I wasn't interested in that, that I really wanted to get home. And he says, "Well, I can tell that you're cold, so why don't I make you something to drink?" And I said, "No, I really just need to get home. I have school tomorrow." And he proceeded to take off my jacket. And I said, "I'm really cold and I want to just get back home." And he removed my jacket and he started to rub my shoulders. And he said, "No, I can tell that you're really tense." And I said, "I'm I'm cold and I want to go home." And he continued to rub my shoulders, putting his hands under my shirt and around my neck, and just giving this illusion that this was okay and acceptable and that he wanted my compliance, but not being overtly aggressive. So it was really confusing to me because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if this was just a desperate man trying to have someone like and appreciate him, or if he was actually violent. I wasn't sure. And I decided to play nice because I didn't want to accelerate anything. And I wondered if maybe he had a mental illness because he just kept talking. And it was a weird kind of talking, like that it wouldn't have even mattered if I was there or not. Eventually, he told me to go lay down on the mattress, which I again told him I didn't want to do that. Reminded him I wanted to go home, reminded him about my roommate, and he told me that he wanted to continue to give me a massage. He didn't really make it seem like it was an option for me to say no, although he hadn't really been aggressive either. I was on a boat in the middle of water in the middle of an area that I had no idea where I was, and I just wanted to get out of it without too much drama. So I laid down on the mattress and he began to rub my back, and then he reached around and undid my pants. I started to cry because I was pretty sure I was going to be raped, and I was trying to mentally prepare for that and also let him know that, I guess, in some way, that I wasn't going to fight, that I was going to go along with it. And I was hoping that by doing that, one, I could shut down and leave my body, and two, that I would save my life. My fear was that this would be my last day alive, and I thought about my parents and how they would wonder about me, and I just thought that that would be, I worried about my parents. I worried that I would never see them again. After he unbuttoned my pants, I was crying and I began to pray silently. I talked to God and just apologized for all the wrongs that I had done. And I had told him that I didn't want to be raped again. And when I said again, I was surprised by myself because I had been in denial about the date rape. I prayed and told him that if he could save me from this situation, that I would do whatever it took to be right in his graces, in God's graces. And when I look back at that, I just think about all the women who have been in the same position and who have prayed and who haven't made it. And I also realize that I'm always in God's graces, and things happen to us and around us and for us that are out of our control sometimes. And we have choices that can lead up to that sometimes, but not always. And it just, I just prayed. I prayed. I could hear the rain on the roof. I could feel this man's hands on me. And he was laying on top of me. He actually was. He had his legs on top of my legs. He had his knees pressed into the backs of my knees. And I was very confident that I was going to be raped and sodomized. And as I could feel his hands on my back and they were moving lower onto my low back, I felt a lot of pressure on my back and realized that he was laying his full body on top of mine. And then I felt him go limp, not like just his whole body. And I realized that he had fallen asleep on top of me. I just kept praying as he just laid there on top of me. I was afraid to move because I didn't want to wake him. I was uncomfortable with the pressure of his body and the weight of his body on top of me, but I just kept praying. The tears just kept falling, and I just had a really heartfelt conversation with God. I really just was looking at all the things that I had done wrong, my choices that were leading to victimization over and over, patterns of my behavior. I was thinking about if I could run and how I wondered about how cold the water was if I were to jump in it. When I was on the canoe, I was looking around to see what was around, and it was mostly industrial area. I could see what I thought was a cliff across from me because there was a house way on top of the cliff, and I had no idea if there was a path that would get up to that house. And I thought that might be my only hope if I were to run. But I was really concerned with it being Minnesota and the water in the fall, and just wondering how cold it was going to be and if I would have hypothermia and if I would get away. He had a boat and I would swim, and I wasn't the best swimmer. So I was thinking about all these things as I laid there. I don't know how much time passed, but I know that the meeting probably ended around 8 p.m. And I laid there until sun started to come through the window, and I heard the rain pattering on the roof all night as he laid there. At some point in the night, he kind of mumbled and rolled to my side, and so he was no longer on top of me. But again, I was afraid to move, and I just kept praying and laying there. Eventually, the man woke up. He looked at me a little bit surprised, a little bit dazed, and I just trust that God intervened, because I think the man did have intentions to do harm. And I think he was a little surprised that he hadn't, and maybe that I was still there. In the morning when he woke up, and again, I don't remember the time, but the sun had come up. He stood up and he looked at me and he said, "Get your coat." And I had already managed to button my pants again. So I just stood up and I got my coat, and in kind of an annoyed way, I followed. The man was in seemed to be annoyed. I followed him out of the boat, onto the canoe, back to the truck, and he drove me home. All the turns that he had made on the way there were completely irrelevant because he only made about 4 or 5 turns to get us back home. And we were silent pretty much the entire way home. And he took me right to my dorm. He didn't even ask me. He just knew exactly where to go because he had already been there the one time. And he dropped me off and said goodbye. And as I was like getting out of the car, he said, "Call me." I went into my dorm and I took a shower and I cried. I remember telling a woman at an AA meeting about what happened, and she asked me if I had reported it, and I told her I didn't know what to report. To this day, I honestly don't remember if I ever filed a report. The sponsor that I had, the woman from AA, did call the clubhouse and let them know about the circumstance and gave the description to the clubhouse of the gentleman that, not gentleman, of the man who had abducted me. and they said that they didn't know who he was. So I don't know if he was there that night looking for someone like me, someone vulnerable and naive and hurt, or if he was there because he too was struggling with recovery. I don't know. But I do believe that God intervened that night and that God saved me and kept me from being raped or worse. And I did start attending church and start developing my spirituality more, and really thanked God for the intervention and really began pursuing my faith more diligently to see what God had for me and what God's plans were for me. So that's my story of the boatman. I hope that it brings you some encouragement and inspiration to know that we do have a purpose here on this earth. And we never know how quickly things can change, and we never know the outcomes of those. So, my encouragement to you today is to not worry about what other people think of you. Trust your intuition, trust your instinct. Have faith in knowing that sometimes there's a bigger picture that we just don't understand. And no matter how it turns out, there's a reason. You never know when things are going to change. So let your loved ones know what you think, how you feel. And if you're ever in a dangerous situation, do whatever it takes to get out alive and as safe as possible. And of course, afterwards, get the help that you need. Okay. I hope that this brings some inspiration to you today. And if you are interested in being interviewed on my show, please let me know. I have my contact details in the show notes. I'd love to hear your story of inspiration. Thanks so much.